214. That is the number I arrived at when I finally counted. Not an estimate, not a rough approximation. An actual count that I did on a Saturday afternoon in 2015, sitting at my desk with a yellow legal pad and a calendar from 1989 that I had found in a box in the garage that Margaret had never thrown away, because Margaret never threw anything away that might one day matter. 214 dinners, in 1 year. 1 year out of the many years I was the kind of father who was not at the dinner table on a given evening. But 1989 was the year I counted because 1989 was the year Thomas stopped asking. He was 12 years old, and somewhere in the second half of 1989 he stopped asking if I was going to be home for dinner. Not dramatically, not in a confrontation, not with the kind of announcement that would have registered as something I needed to respond to. He just stopped asking. And I did not notice for 6 months. I did not notice for 6 months that my 12-year-old son had stopped asking if his father was going to be at the dinner table. That is the sentence I sat with on that Saturday afternoon in 2015. Not the 214, that sentence. My name is Harold Voss. I am 84 years old. My heart is running at 38%, and I want to talk about a 12-year-old boy who stopped asking a question, and what it means when the people who love you stop asking for things. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something. Is there someone in your life who has stopped asking you for something they used to ask for? Not because they stopped needing it, because they learned that asking did not produce what they needed. Write yes or no in the comments, just yes or no. Because the moment someone stops asking is not the moment the need disappears. It is the moment they decide to meet the need somewhere else, or to learn to live without it. And knowing which one it is requires paying attention in a way that I was not paying attention in 1989. I want to tell you how I arrived at the number 214. In 2015, I found the calendar in the garage, a standard wall calendar from 1989. Margaret had marked things on it the way she always did: school events, doctor appointments, the ordinary infrastructure of a family's year recorded in her neat handwriting. I took it to my desk. I went through it month by month. On the days I could confirm I had been home for dinner, I made a tick. On the days I could confirm I had not, I made a cross. On the days I genuinely could not remember, I left them blank. By December, I had 106 ticks, 47 blanks, and 214 crosses, 365 days, 106 dinners, 214 evenings my family sat at the table without me. I sat at my desk for a long time after I finished counting. Then I thought about Thomas, 12 years old, second half of 1989, stopping asking. And I tried to identify the specific evening when it happened. I could not, because I had not been there. Here is the first thing I want to tell you about those 214 evenings. Each one felt justified at the time. Not all of them were work. Some were. A meeting that ran late. A client dinner that was professionally necessary. A project that required my presence past the hour when I should have been driving home. But not all of them. Some were simply the accumulated gravitational pull of a working life that had expanded to fill every available hour, because I had never drawn a clear line between the hours that belonged to the work and the hours that belonged to the family. And in the absence of a clear line, the work had taken everything it could reach, which was most of 1989. Which was most of the years around 1989, which was most of the years that Thomas was between 8 and 16, the years that I would give anything to have back. Not to be a different kind of father necessarily, not to have been perfect, just to have been there. 160 more times that year, 160 more evenings at the table with a 12-year-old boy who had not yet learned to stop asking. That is what 214 costs. The second thing I want to tell you, when Thomas stopped asking, he was protecting himself from something. I want to be specific about what he was protecting himself from because I think it is the part that fathers most need to understand and least want to hear. He was not protecting himself from disappointment. Disappointment requires surprise. Disappointment requires that the thing you hoped for does not arrive, and that the not arriving was unexpected. By the second half of 1989, Thomas was not surprised when I was not at dinner. He was protecting himself from something more specific than disappointment. He was protecting himself from the specific experience of wanting something from his father and not receiving it. The wanting itself was the painful part, because the wanting produced an expectation, and the expectation produced an evening of watching the door, and the watching produced the specific and quiet devastation of a child who has learned to read the hour correctly and knows that the door is not going to open. He was not protecting himself from my absence. He was protecting himself from the hope that preceded it. By not asking, he removed the hope. And without the hope, there was no watching. And without the watching, there was no devastation. Just an evening. Just dinner. Just his mother and his brother and his sister, and the table set the way it was always set, whether I was there or not. That is what a 12-year-old boy figured out in the second half of 1989. How to make his father's absence hurt less, by needing him less. I have thought about that more than almost anything else in my life. Here is my second question for today. Think about the people who love you most. Not whether they love you, you know they do. Think about whether they are still asking, whether they still bring you the wanting, the hope, the expectation that you might be there, or whether they have done what Thomas did, quietly, without announcing it, without a confrontation or a conversation you could respond to, just stopped asking. Because the not asking hurts less than the asking. Write one word in the comments, still asking, or stopped. Just those two options. Because the answer tells you something about whether you are still inside the years when there is time to change what the asking produces, or whether you are sitting at a desk with a calendar from a year that is already over, counting what you missed. I called Thomas in 2015 after I finished counting. Not to tell him what I had counted. He did not need that number. It was my number. The accounting was mine to do. I called him to ask a question. I said, "Thomas, I want to ask you something and I want you to answer honestly." He said, "All right." I said, "Do you call me when things are difficult? When something is going wrong or you are not sure what to do? Do you call me?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Not usually, Dad, no." I said, "Who do you call?" He said, "Mostly I figure it out myself. Sometimes I call David." I said, "Why not me?" He was quiet again, longer this time. Then he said, "I think because growing up I learned that you were busy, and I got used to figuring things out without you, and I never really unlearned that. I think because growing up I learned that you were busy, I got used to figuring things out without you, and I never really unlearned that." My son was 42 years old when he said that. He had learned it at 12. He had been carrying it for 30 years. Not as a wound, not as something he was angry about, just as a fact about how his relationship with his father worked. His father was busy. You figured things out without him. That was simply how it was. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. Then I called him back. I said, "Thomas, I want to try something. The next time something is difficult or you are not sure what to do, I want you to call me. Not to get advice necessarily, just to tell me about it. I want to hear it." He said, "All right, Dad." He called 3 weeks later. Nothing dramatic. A situation at work he was navigating. A decision he was not sure about. He talked. I listened. At the end he said, "Thanks, Dad. It helped to say it out loud." I said, "Call me next time too," he said. "I will." He did. Not every time. Not for everything. But more than before 2015. More than the 30 years of being a man whose son had learned at 12 years old that his father was busy and had never really unlearned it. 214 evenings in 1 year. 30 years of Thomas figuring things out without me. 3 weeks between asking him to call and the first call. That is the arithmetic. The last part of it is the most important, because it means the 30 years are not the end of the story. They are the middle of it. And the end is still being written. On Tuesday evenings when Thomas calls, not because something is dramatic, but because he has something to figure out and he knows now that his father wants to hear it. That is not the story I planned. It is better than the story I deserved. Leave me a comment. Write yes or no. Write still asking or stopped. Write whatever this brought up for you. I read every single one. And if someone you know has a child who has stopped asking, send this to him. Before the calendar year is already over, and the only thing left to do is count. I am not done yet.